Sleep for me is a deep, dark pit from which I emerge, coated in sweat and gasping for breath. Sometimes I cry out as I wake and lash out with my fists at the fragments of my dreams. It will be far too early to be awake, but I know that there's no way that I'll go back to sleep. And I lie there staring at the ceiling, and I think of how it all went wrong. Now, I was a hard-working and honest cop, a detective with the Major Investigation Unit. We were tasked with dealing with the worst crimes that plagued London. It was intense and at times it could be incredibly frustrating, but I was good at my job and it was going well for me. My career prospects were looking bright. Sadly, the same could not be said of my private life. I was married, but my wife had moved out and filed for divorce. She said that I was never there for her, that I was distant, obsessed. Thinking about her, about what she might be doing, about who she might be with instead of me, it hurt. It made me feel physically sick. Because I was still in love with her and I knew that I had lost her. This made me throw myself deeper into my work. I stayed at the station even later than before she left, delaying going back to the empty flat that reminded me of her, of all that could have been. It was close to midnight when the alert came in about a suspicious death in Canary Wharf. It was late January and rain struck the window in front of me as I got to my feet. I had been staring at a screen for hours and I felt drained. That wasn't going to change now that I had a fresh case. I wasn't the type of police officer who got an adrenaline rush on the way to investigate a new, potentially extreme crime. I knew some fellow cops who did, men and women. I tried to keep my distance from them. I rubbed a crick in my neck and I headed for the elevator. 15 minutes later, I had signed out of a pool car and was driving through the city center maze of high-rises and centuries-old buildings. The area, which had become the capital's financial district in the last few decades, had once been a bustling dock, a fetid place where cutthroats waited in the back streets and opium was cheap. Now towers rose around carefully designed squares and, if there were any dark places, they lingered in the hearts of men. According to the developing reports that had come in over the radio, the victim had been found in a penthouse apartment by his fiancée, who had been away on business in New York. She had let herself in and had been confronted by a hideous sight. I parked up at the entrance to the apartment block. A queasy-looking concierge was in conversation with a uniformed officer. I climbed out and winced as a spasm of pain ran up my back. It was stress as much as a sedentary lifestyle that was making me feel like this. I was 35 years old but sometimes felt more like an 80-year-old man on a very bad day. I promised myself that I would start going to the gym, and then I showed my ID to the officer and headed inside. The lobby was classy, all wood panels and dark glass, and it was bigger than my apartment and much nicer, and it smelt a whole lot better as well. The elevator purred all the way down to the top floor where I stepped out onto a carpeted hallway. A little way down, a door stood open, and I could hear the murmur of activity taking place inside. The apartment was open plan over 2 levels with stunning views over the river. There was a man in a plush armchair facing the Thames which flowed serenely in the darkness below. He wasn't enjoying the view. He wasn't enjoying anything. His throat had been cut from ear to ear and his collarless linen shirt and slacks were stained with dried blood. One of my junior colleagues came over and started giving me the details. Our victim was 25, worked in corporate finance and overseas markets, and was well-liked. His fiancée, who was in one of the apartment's 4 bathrooms still vomiting, loved him very much and had been looking forward to their wedding that summer in Florence. He had everything, my colleague added. Money, love, and looks. I looked again at the man's face. I had read somewhere once that the faces considered most beautiful are symmetrical, in perfect balance. I didn't have any kind of eye for that kind of thing, but I did agree that he was handsome. Could even maybe have been a classic movie star in a different life. But his future now was the body bag which was being rolled out at his feet and to date with a pathologist. I double-checked with my colleague about our other basic details, but there were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. There had, though, been a long blonde hair found on the pillow of his bed, and his fiancée is a redhead. My colleague commented, "So, maybe he was cheating on her and whoever he was with did this." I nodded. "It's a possibility, but let's keep an open mind and let the facts keep leading us." I wrote up my initial report, emailed it to the head of the major investigation unit, and then left the crime scene at 5 a.m. Dawn was still hours away, and the rain had been replaced by a cold wind. I shivered and hurried back inside the car, turned the heater to full, and closed my eyes just for a moment. What felt like seconds later, somebody was tapping on the window. My eyes shot open, and there was a traffic warden looking at me. "You can't park here," he said. "I've issued you a ticket. Have a nice day." He smiled and walked away. I stared at the paper wrapped inside a plastic bag tucked under one of my windshield wipers, and I swore. I couldn't believe that I had fallen asleep like that. It was 9 a.m. Rain clouds rolled across a gray sky. Officially, my next shift did not start until midday, but I was keen to see what progress there had been on the case. I drove past a number of gyms on my way back to the station. I stopped at one and I paid for a guest pass, because their showers were way better than the ones at the police station. I didn't have any clean clothes to change into, but I still felt a lot better when I had arrived back at my desk. The case had progressed. Information had been collected and CCTV footage had been checked. A young blonde woman had been seen entering the building the morning before the murder. She was by any standards stunningly attractive, and gilded through the lobby as if she owned the place. There were no more sightings of her, but there was footage of someone shady looking leaving around 8 p.m. They were wrapped up in a baggy hooded sweatshirt and joggers, and no features could be made out. Maybe it was her, maybe not. I logged onto my workstation. I was confident that a breakthrough was on the way. 2 nights later, the investigation had stalled. There were no leads on the identity of the blonde woman and no other persons of interest. A friend of the victim claimed to have seen him in a 5-star restaurant in the West End on the night that his body was found around 11 p.m., which was not possible as the man was already dead by then. This friend was later arrested for being in possession of Class A drugs, so their statement was discounted as they were clearly an unreliable witness. It felt like they were staring at a brick wall. The midnight hour had been and gone, but I was still around. The station was quiet. The senior officer in charge of the investigation had told everybody to go home and make a fresh start in the morning. I still couldn't face my apartment. I leaned back in my seat, my eyelids growing heavy, when an alert appeared on my computer. A suspicious death. In Knightsbridge, a wealthy, exclusive district. Not a good week to be rich, I thought with a wary smile, then dragged myself to my feet. The scene this time was a townhouse. It dated back to Georgian times but had been renovated multiple times. The basement housed a sauna and a swimming pool. The once crystal clear blue water was now streaked with blood, and a woman lay floating in the middle of the pool. Her throat had been cut. She had been beautiful once with her life stretching out ahead of her, and the way that she had been killed and her good looks and obvious wealth brought a very unwelcome thought to the front of my mind. Apart from the gender of the victim, it's the same MO. The next morning, in a crowded briefing room, the head of the unit addressed all the officers working on the original and now this new case. There is the possibility that we are dealing with a potential serial killer here, and we are going to play this investigation very close to our chests. The families of both victims are high-profile and influential, and they do not want these tragedies splashed all over the tabloids. Is that understood? He looked slowly around the room. Passing on information to a journalist was an easy way to make money, but as he met the eyes of everyone there, it was clear there would be a world of pain for anyone who leaked info. "Good," he said. Now the two victims moved in the same social circles. They were not friends, but it is probable that their paths had crossed. I'm going to assign a team to make contact with known associates of both victims who share their characteristics: young, good-looking, and rich, but still alive. And let's keep it that way too. And I want all contacts to be made in person in as low-key a way as possible. There's no point keeping this out of the gutter press if a single person tweets about it. And that was the briefing over. It was time to hit the streets. As I drove to the home address of the first name on my list, the world around me seemed distant. The office blocks and the shops, all brightly lit against the gloom of a winter's day. The people rushing in and out of the tube stations. The cars and the buses and the bikes crammed into the roads. This was a world that did not know there was a monster in their midst, and that I was on its trail. When I arrived, I parked in front of the house. It overlooked Regent's Park, a view that would in itself add some more knots to the price of this property. As I climbed out of the car, a wave of dizziness passed over me. I was running on empty. Forget about the gym, I needed to sleep. I took slow, shallow breaths and felt steadier on my feet. I was going to be fine, I told myself. I had done thousands of interviews in my time in the force, and this was just going to be a gentle chat in affluent surroundings. I pressed the buzzer, and when a woman's voice asked me what I wanted, I showed my ID to the camera on the door. A few moments later, the door opened, and as the cliché says, my breath was taken away. The woman who stood in the hallway was maybe in her early 30s. Her long dark hair hung loose over her shoulders, and she had stunning green eyes. She was the most beautiful woman that I had seen in my life. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. I swallowed. All of a sudden, I was a gawky teenager again, who struggled to even speak to a member of the opposite sex. "No," I managed to answer. "I just have a few questions." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and my internal temperature shot up. "Oh, sure," she said. "Do you want to come in?" I followed her down a hallway decorated with ornate paintings. The scent that she was wearing made my skin tingle. We reached a lounge that looked like it was straight out of a Sunday supplement dedicated to the lives of the rich and famous. She stood in the center of the room and smiled. Desire slammed into me. "There's nothing to worry about," I said in an unprofessionally shaky voice. "But..." A phone began to ring in another room. "Oh, I better get that," she said. "So many party invitations, so little time." And with that, she was gone. I wiped a sweat from my brow. I really needed to get a grip. Splashing cold water on my face would be a start. "Do you mind if I use your bathroom?" I called out in the direction that she had gone. There was no answer, so I went in search of a bathroom. There were way too many doors, and they were all closed, so I would have to take potluck. I knocked on one door, opened it, to see that it was a storage space. I tried the next door along. It was a bedroom. There was a woman lying in the bed. Her long dark hair lay over her shoulders, and her beautiful green eyes stared blindly up at the ceiling. A jagged line of red showed where her throat had been cut. I didn't reach for my radio to call it in. I didn't check her pulse. I just stood there, staring. The dead woman on the bed looked exactly like the woman that I had just been speaking to. She was identical. But how? I heard movement behind me, snapped out of my fugue and spun around. The woman was standing there, and she was very much alive. And she sounded perfectly calm when she said it. "Oh, you found her. That's such a shame. I could have had so much fun in this shape. Still, easy come, easy go." A new smile played across her lips, and as I watched with mounting horror as her features shifted, her eyes grew larger and darker until they were brown. Her hair receded and flecks of gray appeared in it, and there were flecks of gray in the dark stubble that now lined her chin. A cold wave of fear passed through me as I struggled to comprehend what was happening. The woman that had been standing in front of me was gone, and I was looking at myself. The bags under my eyes, the scar on my left cheek where I had been slashed when I was a constable on the beat, they were all there. It was like I was looking in a mirror. My flesh and blood, a reflection grinned and said in my voice, "Oh, this shape does not meet my usual high standard. I favor the aesthetically perfect and a certain standard of lifestyle, but I can't maintain each form for long, so I need a new pretty face and top body to become once more desirable and successful. Ah, well, after I dispose of you, I will move on, find a new handsome man or woman and shapeshift into them. First, though, there is the little matter of cutting your throat." With a swift movement, he produced a blade. It was long and viciously sharp. He moved towards me with a cold and calculating expression in his eyes. The blade was in his right hand. He was raising it. One accurate cut was all that it would take. I would be dead and bled out on the floor. Terror pulsed through my veins. He lunged, but I managed to parry him with my arm, which began to burn with pain. He had slashed my forearm from wrist to elbow, and there was blood everywhere. I felt nauseous and felt like the world began to spin around me, and he came at me again. This time I met him head on, screaming out and throwing myself against him with every ounce of strength that I could muster. For a moment we were two tangled bodies, and I found myself lying on top of him on the floor. I rolled away and saw that the blade was sticking in his chest. It was in almost up to the hilt. I dragged myself away and propped myself up against the wall. He was looking in horror at the blade protruding from his body. Slowly, his hands shaking like crazy, he pulled it out, and then he howled in pain. It was not the sound that any human being would have made. He howled and he began to change. His face started to ripple. His eyes became dark, empty cavities, and his lips shriveled, revealing cracked and rotted teeth. His nose collapsed in on itself and his skin fell away. His hands twisted into sharp stumps. I watched, paralyzed by fear, as the shape that he had adopted slipped away, and the true grotesque being beneath was revealed. It looked at me with its foul eyes and snarled in a distorted voice, "I will not die here. I will not become a freak to be dissected and hidden away." It began to crawl towards the open door. I held up a hand and whispered, "Don't," and then I passed out. I rose in and out of consciousness over the hours that followed, and there are still gaps in my memory. 24 hours had passed before the medic said that I was fit enough to be interviewed. Two detectives that I did not recognize sat by my bed in the hospital, and they read me my rights. And then they told me that a neighbor had heard shouting and screaming and they had phoned the police. By the time responding officers had arrived, it was too late. I was found in the room with the body of the victim, and there was a blade on the floor. It was clear that the detectives' minds were already made up. "No, it looks like she fought back before you killed her," one of them said, their voice cold and hard. "That seems clear to us," his colleague added. "So you need to come clean. Confess." That was 8 months ago. I'm on remand now, and each night I wake from a nightmare and lay staring at the ceiling of my prison cell. I'm locked in for 23 out of every 24 hours, apart from the days when my solicitor visits. Then I get an extra 30 minutes, which I spend in a windowless room. My trial is coming up, and at the meetings, my solicitor pleads with me to forget about what I had told the police in the interview, and to tell them what really happened, to tell them the truth. But this is the truth. I'd been on the trail of a monster that hid behind a human face.